I'm Mike Brown, Managing Director of Eunomia. I'm going to try and set some sort of international and national context is the idea. I'm not going to be talking much about Gloucestershire at all, but I will be talking about a lot of things that perhaps a little bit more detail from the fantastic helicopter view we've just had from Jonathan and laying the groundwork for people to talk a little bit more locally. One thing I just want to, one myth I want to dispel actually is that Eunomia is regularly, from both sides of the argument, seen as anti-incineration. We're always opposed to incinerators. And I just want to make it clear, I mean, my own personal view, and I think that within Eunomia as well, is that would be too simplistic a thing to say, and it wouldn't be a sensible thing to do either. And there are incinerators of municipal and commercial industrial waste that are inappropriate, and there are facilities that are appropriate. And please don't assume we're one or the other. It really does depend on the development. Jonathan touched on a few things, the sorts of things you'd want to know before you formed a view as to whether or not a particular facility was the right thing to do. You'd want to know how efficient is it at generating energy. If it's only generating electricity, it's dirtier than a gas-fired power station. If it's a fully efficient CHP facility, arguably, you could call it a power station as opposed to a waste facility. And so that's one thing you want to look at. You'd also want to look at scale. And the reason you want to look at scale is because in the lifetime of the facility, been set up really nicely, in the lifetime of this asset that you might be looking at, you want to know that you aren't going to be crowding out the alternatives further up the hierarchy and further within the circular economy. You've got to get the scale right. If you get the scale too big, then that may make it inappropriate. So I just wanted to lay the ground. We're often seen as anti-incineration. It really isn't quite like that or like that. The reason I think I'm here, if I said, if I thought of two main things why I'm probably the right person and Eunomia is the right organisation to talk about things I'm about to talk about. Number one, we are, and have been for the last 3 years, the advisor to DG Environment in the European Commission on the circular economy. So the circular economy package that's coming out of Europe, stalled once, looking like the second lot's coming through nicely now, hopefully in play, possibly within this year. We've been doing all the work on that. We've done all the background research across 28 member states, done all the modelling, all the design work, so we are the lead advisors. Dominic Hogg, my partner, who's not in the country at the moment, he is leading on that. I'm not the absolute expert on the circular economy, which you'll probably tell, but we are in a very fortunate position there. The other thing we do is, Eunomia, and we don't have a client for this, we do it for ourselves, obviously, it's to raise our profile. We, twice a year, track all residual waste treatment infrastructure in the UK, and we balance that against waste arisings, and we do our biannual residual waste infrastructure review, which is free to people who want to have a look at it. So we're pretty well in a good position to understand the supply and demand of residual waste and residual waste treatment infrastructure. I'm going to talk to you in total for 25 minutes, 5 minutes later, less than on the programme, to allow a little bit of extra time for Q&As. So that's what I'm going to talk about. Quick intro to Eunomia. Talk about the circular economy, some of the policy instruments that may be relevant. Then I'm going to dive into the UK waste market. I'm going to quickly touch on RDF export, because these days it's a new show in town that is very relevant to the UK waste market, and I'm going to then sort of join all those things up together and look at the supply and demand and what the balance is looking like over a timeline, and then a few concluding remarks. So I'm not going to do, I've done a bit of a pitch in terms of who we are. The three of us own and run the company. There's about 75 of us now, 70 did it say there, 70 of us now. We pretty much do have the biggest strategic waste consultancy in terms of strategic and policy kind of advice, although we do other stuff as well in the UK and abroad. We're one of the main advisors to the Commission, as I said, and to various governments. And we've got an expanding office base, started off in Bristol, but in the last few years it's gone a little bit crazy, so we do have people in various parts of Europe. I'm not going to spend too long on this, but these are the sorts of things we do in case you're interested. Most of these are publicly available. The work we do for our private sector clients tends not to be, But these are the sorts of things we do. Environmental fiscal reform for Europe. What's that one? Regional cooperation of the West Balkans. We're working in the West Balkans at the moment. There's some of the key accession states, former Yugoslavia, where we're looking for the European Investment Bank at what changes need to be made for these member states to join Europe. Yes, there are member states wanting to join Europe at the moment, as opposed to us thinking of leaving. Modelling tools. What else do we do? We did the European reference model on waste generation and management. That was recently, when was that? 2015. International Review of Waste Management. What else do we do? There's circular economy work we're doing for London. Anyway, I'm not going to go on too much long about that. Talked about the circular economy, talked about the residual waste infrastructure review, talked about waste infrastructure in accession state. So there we are. Yes, good, that's the end. So there's our credentials. That's why you should listen to us. Hopefully you will. So what is the circular economy? Again, Jonathan's set this out quite nicely. That's how it has always been. You make, you use, you throw it away. And of course, I mean, I don't think you can probably do much better than looking at what the Ellen MacArthur Foundation has produced. There's a debate as to who has resurrected the idea of the circular economy. It's been around for a long time. But I mean, in essence, it's about keeping stuff, where's that button? It's about keeping stuff in the loop for longer, maintaining, reusing, refurbishing, recycling. And that's on the material side, and of course, it's the same on the biowaste side. And of course, that's not just about trying to preserve the physical products, physical materials that are in the products we're all using and consuming. Even more importantly, it's about preserving the energy, the invisible energy that's inside those products that's been invested in producing those products in the first place, and not having to use energy again to produce more products because you threw it away. I mean, I'm just going to point out as a fact, leakage to be minimized. In other words, the leakage out of the circular economy, there's a little thing, and there are two areas to be minimized. One is energy recovery, one is landfill. And you may have a view as to what kind of energy recovery. Is it low efficiency in the 20s electricity only, or is it high efficiency CHP, etc.? But I mean, certainly as far as Ellen MacArthur Foundation is concerned, energy recovery is not fundamentally a circular economy activity. Okay, I mean, I think it's just worth, because we talk about the waste hierarchy a lot, we talk about the circular economy a lot, and this is just one way of looking at it. Here's the hierarchy: prevention, reuse, recycle, recover some energy, disposal, landfill. And all we've done here is we just chucked up here this thing called design at the top. And I think if you just want a really simple rule of thumb way of thinking of the circular economy in the context of the waste hierarchy, and it is slightly oversimplistic, but just think about chucking this design thing at the top and focusing really heavily on that early on. Design out the amount of waste you use, design in durability, design in maintainability and repairability. And then you'll have less waste to prevent in the first place, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we're not so convinced that the circular economy is this whole brand new thing that no one's ever thought of before. Actually, a lot of, if not most of what the circular economy is about is encapsulated in a lot of Ad Lindsay's waste hierarchy. Okay, what else I'm going to talk about? This is what McKinsey said. McKinsey said that the circular economy will take care of itself because commodity prices are just going to keep going up. So we'd all be crazy to throw stuff away. We're not so convinced about that at all. We think there's a lot of volatility in the marketplace for materials and for energy, and you've only got to look at what's happening to fossil fuel prices at the moment to see that there's huge market volatility. So I don't think we're alone in believing that you can't rely on high material energy prices to drive the circular economy, which is all about keeping resources in use for as long as possible and recovering and regenerating products. So, the circular economy thinking can provide lots of benefits. I'm not going to spend time on those: resource security, reduced impacts, etc. But going back to the point of whether this thing will sort itself out or not, our view certainly is that policy intervention is going to be needed. of course, policy intervention is happening. And it's happening with the circular economy package coming in from Europe, driving 65% recycling targets for municipal waste by 2030 and slightly higher targets for commercial and industrial wastes. And there it is. Obviously, packaging, producer responsibility is a big part of this. And of course, don't forget, you've got a 10% landfill cap as well coming through on the circular economy. So these are, and new minimum operating standards and conditions for producer responsibility, which a lot of people argue aren't working as well as they should be. So, I mean, this is huge. This is, if you go back 20 years, it's as big as the impact the landfill directive, slowly but surely through various measures, eventually had on landfill, which is that today landfill is rapidly coming to an end. There's lots of policy instruments that I could spend time on. I'm going to try and save a bit of time here. You'll know about a lot of these, and I'm happy to answer questions on voluntary agreements, instruments, regulations, but I'm conscious of how much time we've got, so I want to keep us moving. Producer responsibility is an area where there's a huge variation across member states, for example, in terms of how they're implemented. In the UK, producer responsibility doesn't work particularly well, and you've only got to think about the packaging you take away and who's responsible for paying for it. You've only got to think about the litter that's generated and who's responsible for picking it up. It's rarely the companies that provide that material charging their customers, and it might be some of you, to pay for it, and it's all too often it's all of us as a society paying through our local authorities, for example. So that's my quick introduction to the circular economy. There's lots we can talk about. I've got about 13 minutes left, which is good, because I now want to move on and talk about the UK waste market, which hopefully will set the scene a little bit for discussions later on. So there's the residual review that we do biannually. And if energy recovery is leakage from the circular economy, then it follows that if there were to be overcapacity of energy recovery, incineration, or other forms of residual treatment, then that actually could be a threat to the circular economy. So it is really important to understand how much capacity we are developing in the UK as a whole. Just to set the boundaries of what I'm going to talk about, I'm talking about residual waste, and I'm to some extent talking about RDFs and SRFs as well. We're talking about waste from municipal sources and commercial and industrial sources, and I'll be talking about investment in UK infrastructure. Obviously, it's influenced by policy, influenced by regulation, like the landfill directive, like PFI. And just to point one thing out, planning is rarely the challenge anymore. The industry, which I've been a part of for 30 years, complained for a long, long time that planning was the barrier to residual waste infrastructure. We can't get planning permission for our facilities. That simply isn't the case anymore. There's plenty of planning consents out there. It's actually investment is the issue. So what are the key regulatory and policy mechanisms affecting investment in infrastructure? Austerity measures make it very hard for local authorities to make new investments. We've talked about recycling targets. The circular economy, if we do have a 65% recycling target by 2030 as a nation, you can consider that to be, in effect, an incineration cap. There's other kinds of residual waste treatment, but incineration is the main one. It's effectively an incineration cap. You can't recycle and incinerate. You've basically got to choose. Slight oversimplification, but pretty much that's right. There's incentives for renewable energy you need to think about, landfill tax, landfill allowance schemes, transfer frontier shipment, especially for things like RDF being exported. So all these things are relevant, which we can talk about in more detail if you want to. So just to move on to how much waste is there and how is it being treated. I'm just going to run you through a few numbers here and a few charts, so please bear with me. This is all of the municipal, commercial, and industrial waste in the UK, pretty much, okay? Actually, more than half of it is recycled today. Less than half municipal is recycled, but a lot more than half of C&I is recycled. On average, it comes out at about 56%. Here's the residual infrastructure that's up and running at the moment, 12.5 million tonnes, mostly incineration. Don't worry about that. We always include it because some material is actually spread to land, some material from dairies and that kind of thing. Here's the material being exported, although that's actually this graph is 2014, I think. And there's 10 million tonnes left in landfill. Now that's moving. That's a snapshot just over a year ago. Here's the state of play of the residual waste infrastructure in the UK. So you can see there's loads of facilities all over the place. Triangles are incinerators. Blue is operational. Orange is under construction. Yellow means committed, a financial, a contract has been let, basically. So incidentally, I think there we are, look, there's Javelin Park. So it's actually shown as under construction. So is that one there, is it? That's better. Committed, but not under construction. Thank you. So you'll recognize things like there. I think that must be, that will be Sevenside. That's right, whoever said that. Good, this is a good game, this, isn't it? We could keep going for ages. There's Devon's, which is now operational. There's Cornwall's, which is under construction. Anyway, you get the idea. There's facilities all over the place and quite a bit of capacity. So I'm going to very quickly mention the RDF export market because it is very relevant. So last year was a record year, 3 million tonnes a year of residual waste being exported. This is where it's going. The biggest export is to Holland because they're close and they had spare capacity. And then as Holland started to get full, you can see that Holland actually on its own isn't going up in tonnage. Then more waste has gone to Germany, and you see Sweden expanding as well. And others are places like Denmark, for example. So you've got an increasing export market going on from all over the UK. There are the locations. That's giving you an idea of where it's going to, and also places like Latvia. It moves in all sorts of ways. We don't spend too much time on this, but the three main ways it is moved is simple roll-on, roll-off ferries just on curtain side of lorries, put bales on a lorry, drive on a ferry, drive off the other side, tip it in the bunker, burn it. Bulk movement in coasters, 3,000 or 4,000 tonnes. This is a coaster leaving Pembroke Dock, taking West Wales waste to Sweden. And there are some containerisation going on as well, both on vessels and trains out of the UK, where containers are used. So it's been moved in all sorts of ways. People are getting quite clever with the logistics. So supply and demand. Let's look at some numbers. So there is all of the residual waste split by household and C&I waste. So think of it as, I don't know, what was that? About 27 billion tonnes. You saw the pie chart earlier. It was about the same amount. Here is operational treatment capacity, mostly incineration in the UK. Here is under construction capacity, like Cornwall. What can I overlay on that? There's committed, and that's facilities like Javelin Park. I went two at a time. That's a really interesting one. That blue is non-committed. That's consented facilities. Remember I said earlier that planning consent isn't the barrier anymore. So fantastically, we have, gosh, what's that? 1, 2, 3, over 10 million tonnes of consented residual waste treatment capacity in the UK, all gone through planning, the planning process, consultations, people for, people and against, for which we have no waste. And that's the kind of joined up thinking we have. And I mean, I've got a lot of sympathy actually with local authorities and to some extent the waste operators who have to make decisions on a local basis with no top-down guidance at all. So no one's saying, there's no allocation of capacity that's needed in a particular region or an area. It's basically a free-for-all in terms of applying for what you want to. Yes, there are land use guidance in terms of where physically in an area a waste facility may or may not be suitable, but in terms of the actual scale, here we are, many millions of tons capacity that we have absolutely no need for that has been consented. Okay, 2 scenarios I'm going to show you with 2 different recycling rates. One we've called sort of optimistic, 65% by 2030. I don't personally think it's that optimistic, but let's call it that. And one for the doubters, 60% by 2030. So here's a timeline. So we've done the snapshot. That was the snapshot there, up in this area here. Here's now a timeline. So you've got million tons on the left. Those are 25 to 30 million tons of waste that we're dealing with. You've got years along the bottom. I've taken it helpfully to 2030, end of the circular economy. Obviously, some of these facilities are going to go out to here. And here's the amount of residual waste we've got coming down. And it's either coming down steeply to 65% recycling or shallowly if you believe in 60%. That's on the municipal side. There's other assumptions in there which I can tell you about in terms of C&I waste. The reason it's coming down not quite as fast as the recycling on its own would suggest is because waste volumes are actually also increasing at the same time. So all of that's been taken into account, taking into account population, anticipated GDP growth. It's a projection. It definitely isn't right, but we don't think it's that far wrong. There is the residual waste treatment infrastructure in the UK that's operational. So that's done and dusted. Unless you think people are going to start closing operational facilities that have been working for years, they aren't going anywhere. There's the under construction stuff coming on stream, obviously, coming on stream over the next 2 or 3 years because it's being built. And there's the committed stuff as well. So we assume all of that's going to happen. I'm then throwing in the export material. We've assumed it goes up from the 3 million tons it is today. I think it goes up through 4 to 4.5 million tons is the assumption through that. And then finally, there we are, there's landfill. Landfill coming to an end, yay. Which is what we all wanted, of course, although we didn't quite realize what we were getting in its place. So the really important point about this is that this area here, I'm going to take the optimistic line, this triangle in here, something's got to give, and something's got to give as we approach this line, this crossover line here in about 2 or 3 years' time. Because with absolutely no joined-up thinking, and nobody has their hand on the tiller here, facilities are getting developed all the time. And meanwhile, the waste is being forced down through recycling. And what that suggests is that we're heading towards overcapacity. We may have more infrastructure than we need. And of course, what that does, if it happens, is it brings the price of residual waste treatment down. It makes the alternative harder to afford. And the alternative mainly is recycling. So, I mean, there's concerns about this. If this happens, if our predictions are right, there aren't many people in the sector, private sector, NGO sector, public sector, who benefit from that. It's a bit of a perfect storm. Everybody loses out. It really isn't particularly good news. So, concluding remarks. 1.5 minutes left in my 25 minutes. That's great. We're heading towards overcapacity. We can debate that. It does depend on the assumptions. It's pretty much a mathematical certainty, which is what they said about the Titanic sinking, wasn't it? When he was asked how he knows. But and the circular economy targets, if we're going to meet them, they bring forward that overcapacity. That's the optimistic view. I've just thrown in Brexit. I mean, if Brexit were to happen, then maybe this progress would be slower. It's not. It's hard to ignore that Brexit could happen. If Brexit happens, what do we do about the circular economy? Is it one of the things we don't bother with anymore? So I guess there is a possibility of that. Moving waste up the hierarchy, just sticking with my last couple of slides and concluding comments, keeping within the circular economy, well, where do we go after landfill? You know, if we've got to squeeze more waste into recycling, where's it coming from? You can't take any more out of landfill than is going into landfill. So after that, presumably, there comes a squeeze on thermal treatment. That's where you take the waste out of next. And how do you do that? Well, just nearly 20 years ago, the way waste started to come out of landfill was from a directive, which resulted in trading schemes, landfill tax, PFI credits to the alternative. So, oh, blimey, that wasn't meant to happen. So if we have a circular economy directive coming out of Europe, and the UK is still a member, it seems pretty likely the UK will sign up to it and it will find means and measures to meet it. It won't be able to target landfill because there won't be any waste going to landfill. So it potentially could target the next level up the waste hierarchy. Trading schemes and municipals with excess waste funding recycling schemes elsewhere. We need policy interventions, and they're coming. UK recycling rates are affected by domestic residual treatment capacity and RDF export. You can't ignore those things. And if we're to achieve circular economy, then it's definitely feasible that thermal treatment may need to be disincentivized. Thank you very much.